Today we'll do Revelation chapter 6, which is the first 6 seals. Before we begin, I want to give you some sort of sense for the structure of the seals and the trumpets and the bowls. A lot of people, when they get to the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls, they can feel lost. They want to know if there's an organizing principle, if there's something that will help them understand the layout, how things are kind of put together. And there are two things to keep in mind. First of all, the seals, trumpets, and bowls have a 4+3 structure. The first 4 items in a series will go together, and the next 3 items in a series will go together to give you a total of 7. This is why you have 4 horsemen, because the first 4 seals are going to share a common theme. This is why there are not 3 horsemen or 5 horsemen. There are necessarily 4, 1 for each of the seals. And then after that, you'll have 3 items that go together. You'll have the same thing when you get to the trumpets. You'll notice that in the first 4 trumpets, each one of those trumpets affects about 1/3 of the natural creation, 1/3 of trees, 1/3 of oceans, 1/3 of rivers and springs, etc. And then you'll have the same thing. Items 5, 6, and 7 will go together, and they deal with the armies and the nations of the world. Now, in addition to the 4+3 structure, there's one other thing that you should expect and anticipate along the way, and it's that after item number 6, there will always be an interruption. There will be 2 interlude visions. All right, so after we get through item number 6 of the seals, we'll run into these 2 visions that will postpone the final seal. The same thing will happen with the trumpets. And the 7 bowls of wrath are similar. The first 4 will go together. The last 3 will go together. And again, there's a debate on this one. We'll talk about it when we get there. But some people see an interlude between item 6 and 7. And some people say that in the bowls there is no interlude because things are moving so quickly that history is being wrapped up. That's a discussion we'll have when we get there. But the 4+3 will hold for the trumpets and the seals and the bowls. And that there is 2 interlude visions after item number 6, that is definitely true for the seals and the trumpets, and it's debatable for the bowls. Just depends on who you ask. I looked when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a thunderous voice, "Come." So I looked, and here came a white horse. The one who rode it had a bow, and he was given a crown, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Then when the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature saying, "Come." And another horse, fiery red, came out, and it was given to the one who rode on it to take peace from the earth, so that people would butcher one another. And he was given a huge sword. Then when the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature saying, "Come." And I looked, and here came a black horse. The one who rode it had a balance scale in his hand. And I heard something like a voice from among the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat will cost a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley will cost a day's pay, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine." Then when the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature saying, "Come." So I looked, and here came a pale green horse. The name of the one who rode it was Death, and Hades followed right behind. They were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill its population with the sword, famine, and death, and by the wild animals of the earth. You will likely remember this slide. In the first few weeks of this presentation, I spent a lot of time on the key concepts of the book and on the principles of prophetic fulfillment. I'm not going to spend 2 nights on this as I did previously, but I do want to spend a few minutes reminding us of a few of these principles because they will be helpful to us now that we're at a part of the book where the plagues are going to begin. Namely, the last 2 items on this list. Symbols and meanings were accessible to the original audience. They were not waiting for the invention of modern technology before they could read the book. The book has meaning in their time. The book has meaning throughout church history. The book will have meaning prior to the second coming. Revelation is less concerned with predicting specific events in history and more concerned with predicting the general patterns of history. The reason this is so necessary is because popular level teachers, people who teach on the radio, and people who teach on television, there's a huge gap between them and New Testament scholars on this. And by New Testament scholars, I'm referring to people who read it in Greek, who study other ancient apocalypses to know how the genre works, who are familiar with Second Temple Judaism, ancient Roman Empire, etc. People who are trying to read the book of Revelation in its historical context. There's a great deal of difference between the way they read the seals and the way modern popular teachers read the seals. And I want us to be alert to some of this, because you'll find that most of the popular level teachers on the seals are very chronologically restricted. They think that these seals, like lots of other plagues in the book, are only concerned with a final 7-year period in history referred to as the tribulation, or to a final 3.5-year period in history, usually referred to as the Great Tribulation. And I think that the book is not fulfilled in history up until that point. But this is very problematic, because as we've been seeing as we go through the book, and as we will continue to see, many of these prophecies reference first century persons, first century institutions, the Roman Empire, the Roman emperor cult, things that the ancient Christian audience would have been familiar with in their time. And so it's a mistake to read Revelation and think it's all future, when there are so many things in it that refer to persons and events and institutions that existed in ancient history. At the same time, it would be a mistake to do what so many do in the academic community, and to think that Revelation is only written about things in the ancient world, that it has no application to the future. And this is clearly wrong. Because even though there are many prophecies in this book against the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was persecuting Christians, if you look at the fall of Mystery Babylon in chapters 17 and 18, the fall of Rome wasn't exactly like that. And so we have to understand that even though there are many partial fulfillments of Revelation throughout history, the greatest fulfillment will be prior to the second coming. There will be a final beast figure, a final Antichrist figure, a final persecution, a final wave of martyrdom, and these things will herald the second coming of Christ. So Revelation is a book that is past, present, and future. It is not exclusively future, and it is not exclusively in the past. Over the principles of prophetic fulfillment, to unpack this a little more, I just want to remind us of a couple of these. First of all, item number one, a prophecy can be fulfilled more than once. You'll remember that we looked at a few prophecies that are fulfilled more than once. We looked, for example, at Zechariah chapter 12 and verse 10, where it says that they will look on him whom they have pierced, talking about Israel's shepherd, Israel's king. And John, in his gospel, when Jesus was crucified and the Roman soldier goes up and stabs him with the spear, John says that Zechariah 12:10 was fulfilled at that point. They have looked on him whom they have pierced. But this was not the only fulfillment of that text. We know that because the same writer, John, here in the book of Revelation, says they will look on him whom they have pierced will be fulfilled in the second coming of Christ when he comes on the clouds. You'll remember that discussion from chapter 1. And so prophecies can be fulfilled more than once. Biblical history is very cyclical, and therefore the fulfillment of prophecy is very cyclical. Things happen again and again and again. Now, in item number 3, we talked about how prophecy has a spiraling effect. That is, each time a prophecy is fulfilled, it tends to take on greater significance. It takes on broader ramifications each time it's fulfilled. And we looked at a number of examples. We looked at, for example, the birth of Emmanuel in Isaiah chapter 7. A child was born about 7 centuries before Jesus, whose name was Emmanuel, and his birth meant the salvation of Judah. They were saved from the Syrians, and they were saved from the northern kingdom, and the birth of that child meant the salvation of the people. Well, when Jesus comes along and he is born, he's not the first Emmanuel. He's not the first one to fulfill that Bible prophecy. However, this spiraling effect, Jesus' birth is a much greater fulfillment of that prophecy, because his birth heralds not just the salvation of Judah, but the salvation of the whole world. We looked at Exodus also, since Exodus is really a perfect example of this, because it takes place many times in Scripture, and it becomes a prophecy that is fulfilled in a number of ways. You'll recall that in Genesis, Pharaoh's house is plagued so that he will let Sarah go. That's the first Exodus story. And then Moses in the Exodus, that Pharaoh's house is plagued so that Israel will leave. And then Jeremiah and Isaiah and all these prophets, they say that one day a Exodus is coming that's so great that it will surpass the one under Moses. You can read about that in Jeremiah 16. Uh, the New Testament writers see that as fulfilled in lots of ways. First of all, you have Jesus, who tells Moses and Elijah at the Mountain of Transfiguration that he's on his way to Jerusalem in order to fulfill the Exodus. And sure enough, he shows up at Jerusalem at the Exodus holiday, Passover, and dies as the Passover lamb. And then in 1 Corinthians 10, we looked at how Paul sees the church as fulfilling this prophecy, that we are like Israel in the wilderness, trying not to fall due to sexual immorality, trying not to fall due to our many complaints, and trying not to forfeit our right to enter the promised land. And then finally, the last example we looked at was in Revelation chapter 15, where after the fall of the Antichrist, the people of God are standing next to the sea singing the Song of Moses. Well, this is because in Exodus 15, after the fall of Pharaoh, the children of Israel stand next to the sea and sing the Song of Moses. And so Exodus is fulfilled many times in biblical history, many times in biblical prophecy, and each time it's fulfilled, it takes on greater and greater significance. The reason why I'm saying this is again, the seals are oftentimes viewed differently. Either people want to relegate them only to the final 7 years of history, or they think that each one of these writers has rode across the stage of history, maybe in the 3rd century, maybe one was in the 15th century, etc., and that they write out only once. But this is very inconsistent with what we've been learning. You remember last week we talked about how the book is sealed, and the seals represent something, and then the open book represents something. And the content of the book is the reign of Christ on a recreated earth and the salvation that comes as a result of that. But before you can get to that, before you can get to the content of the book, the 7 seals of history have to be broken. And so what we find these seals are the patterns of history, the necessary troubles and pains and tribulations of history that must necessarily take place before the book can be opened, before we can get to the reign of Christ on a recreated earth. And so these first 4 horsemen, they represent the pattern and the character of human conflict and human war as it will exist all the way up to the second coming. The white horseman has been riding across the stage of history for a long time. The red horseman also. We don't want to be chronologically restricted. It's not just the future. It's not just the past. These guys are always active in the world, and they always will be until the second coming of Christ. Now, one more word before we get into this. There's a very popular interpretation of the 4 horsemen that you can find on TV and radio, and I want to use this as a final example of how this book should not be read. This perspective comes from Irvin Baxter, who is a prophecy teacher who is on the television, and it is a view of the 4 horsemen that other TV preachers, I've seen them borrow this idea, and it's become very popular. And I kind of want to give you a sense of how this works and how arbitrary this is and how wrong this is. First of all, the white horse equals false Christianity, and he uses this as a reference to the Roman Catholic Church. And he justifies this by saying, well, obviously, first of all, he assumes that Catholicism is bad. And then after that, the Pope's wearing white, and there are white buildings at the Vatican, and the Pope Mobile is white, and there are all these things that are white in the Catholic Church. And so he says that white is the color of false Christianity, which is very problematic because elsewhere in the book of Revelation, white is never a picture of false Christianity. This is just something he has sort of made up. And other people who share his dislike of the Catholic Church, they just pick it up. Red is the color of socialism and communism. That's certainly true. It's on their flags. Black, he says, is the color of capitalism. Think of Black Friday. He'll say things like that. Black is in other contexts have been associated with capitalism. And then finally, that green represents Islam. And certainly, green is a very prominent color in Islam. Now, I hope you can see that there are a lot of things wrong with this. I mean, first of all, it does not jive with the logic of the book. In this book, there is a causal relationship between the horsemen. The white horseman leads to the red horseman. The red horseman leads to the black horseman, etc. Well, there is no way to say that Catholicism caused communism, or that communism caused capitalism, or that capitalism caused Islam. I mean, it doesn't work. Whatever your view of the horsemen is, you have to recognize that they are a causal sequence, that the horseman that goes before leads to the horseman that follows. And so automatically a fancy idea like this is undermined. Not only this, these colors have meaning in the ancient world when the book of Revelation is written, and these colors show up elsewhere in the book of Revelation. That's how you determine the color of these books, the meaning of these colors. Now, John and his audience would not have recognized red as the color of communism or black as the color of capitalism, etc. This is a modern person imposing meanings onto these colors that neither John nor his audience would have been familiar with. They, in fact, have definitions and meanings for these colors. And if you have to go, into modern times to make this work, then you're reading the book in the wrong way. Revelation 6:2 says, I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. Now, the first question we have to ask about the white horseman is he Christ? This has been a very common interpretation in church history, and you can see the reason for it. In Revelation 19, it's going to say, And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and wages war. So, since Christ does show up on a white horse later, some folks have said, oh, well, the first seal represents the gospel of Christ going out to conquer the world. And you can see that, that makes sense on a certain level. However, there are problems with it. The description is different. In chapter 19, Christ is carrying a sword, but the white horseman is carrying a bow. When Christ appears on his horse, he will be wearing many crowns, as where this figure is only wearing one crown. It's also awkward and reductionist for Christ to be reduced to only one of four horsemen. Now, it goes without saying, but Christ is kind of a big deal in the book of Revelation. He's the one holding the book. He's the only one worthy to look inside of it. He's the one who breaks the seven seals. And to say, okay, he is this great, awesome figure, but he is only going to be one of the seven seals, right? It's going to be him and then something else in item number 2 and then something else in item number 3. It's very reductionist, and it just seems strange to reduce Christ to the level of these other movements and these other phenomena that are depicted by the seals. Not only that, it is most likely a demonic parody of who Christ is. Throughout the book of Revelation, we'll find that the devil's most common strategy is to parodize the things that God has. Christ was raised from the dead, and so the beast will have a scene where he falsely rises from the dead. Christ has a second coming. There will be a place where the beast has a sort of second coming. You have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and so in the book of Revelation, you have the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. And so you find that the forces of evil are always parodizing everything that Christ is and everything that God is. The forces of darkness are not original, as it were. And so what this is, this represents conquest throughout history. National powers going out to conquer the world. Think of Alexander the Great. Think of the Caesars. And what the book is trying to tell us here is that these conquerors are just failed parodies of who Christ is. When Christ returns on his white horse, he will conquer the planet for good, unlike these other conquerors who have gone out across the stage of history, whose conquest is very short-lived and always of a limited scope. Now, when white is not, again, the color of false religion, it is the color of conquest and victory in the ancient world. The original readers of Revelation would understand this point very well. And we've talked about this a few times already because we've encountered the color white You've seen this picture at the bottom. After the Roman army went out and successfully conquered, when they come back to Rome, they would walk through the city dressed in white, and the senators would go out dressed in white, and the people would go out with them dressed in white, and they would have a victory procession, and they would walk through the streets of the city and celebrate in white. And so that's why the conqueror has a white horse, because that's what the meaning of this color is. It has nothing to do with taking a swing at the Roman Catholic Church. These colors already have meanings in the ancient context. The bow corresponds to the far-reaching geographical range of a great conqueror. So when these conquerors go out, the goal is always to conquer and to conquer some more, to go out and conquer the whole world, or as much of it as they can. And a bow corresponds to this because this is a far-reaching weapon. Now, Parthian cavalry archers may account for the picture, since the Parthians had defeated a Roman army twice, in 55 BC and in AD 62. We will find that since the Roman Empire is threatening and killing Christians, that most of these plagues will use imagery that is designed to scare the Romans. And there were not many armies in the ancient world that scared the Romans. However, the Parthians did scare them because the Parthians had defeated them twice. Now, the prize of the Parthian army was this cavalry rider who used a bow. The Roman soldiers didn't use bows. There was not much archery in the Roman army, but it was a prominent part of the Parthian army. And these guys were so well trained with their bow that they could shoot while riding on their horse. And they would run up to the Roman legionaries and they would shoot off an arrow. And then they would turn around, and running away, they could turn backwards on their horse and still shoot accurately. And so the Romans feared the Parthians. There's a lot of historical evidence of this. And so the fact that the conqueror has a bow may be a threat against Rome. And Emperor Domitian, the emperor who is leading the persecution against the church at this time, he was also trained with a bow. Even though this wasn't a feature of the Roman military, he trained with a bow as a pastime. And so again, we've seen places in the book already where Domitian is criticized, where he is threatened, where he is spoken down. This may be another one of those occasions. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. Red is the color of war and bloodshed. And this is, fairly obvious because red is the color of blood. When you find this color elsewhere in the book of Revelation, it's always in relationship to conflict. Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, when the dragon appears, he goes to persecute the woman and the woman's seed. And then the dragon summons up his own seed from the sea, the beast. And then the beast goes out and starts to persecute and to martyr the church. And so red is definitely associated with bloodshed in the book of Revelation. Now, he is given a broadsword, right, which is a short-range weapon to indicate the slaughter of insurrection and civil war that follows conquest. And we really need to unpack this a little bit. So one thing that has been a stumbling block for a lot of people trying to read Revelation is the first 2 horsemen both represent violence. One has a bow and one has a sword. And so some people have said, well, why have 2 horsemen at all if they both represent violence? Well, they represent the 2 stages of violence that happen in a conquest or an invasion. The white horseman represents the initial conquest, going in, taking over, going out to as Alexander the Great did, and conquering the known world. Well, the red horseman represents the violence that follows. See, the greatest violence does not happen during the invasion. It happens with the insurrections and the rebellions and the potential civil wars that follow after the conquest, as people who have been conquered begin to rebel against their conquerors. That's what the red horseman is. He's the violence that follows the initial stage of conquest. He represents insurrection and civil war. Now, he's given a sword, a great sword, which is a weapon of butchery, and it's a short-range weapon. The bow represents going out and conquering the world. It's a far-distance weapon. The sword is short-range to represent the local pockets of insurrection and rebellion that will lead to so much bloodshed. And we'll talk more about that here in just a moment when we look at a modern example. Now, you'll notice that the red horseman is not wearing a crown. The white horseman was. The reason the white horseman is wearing a crown is because he represents kings and rulers going out to conquer the world. But rebellions and insurrections are not kicked off by kings. They're kicked off by subjugated citizens who don't want to be subjugated anymore. And so that's why the red horseman doesn't have a crown, because this is the violence that is against kings, that is kicked off by the citizens and the common folk. The white horseman has a crown because his decision to conquest came from the palace. It's a decision of the king or the emperor himself. He takes peace from the earth. Again, we see how shaky the claims of Rome are. Rome claimed to bring gospel to the world, that it had saved the world, that Caesar was the Son of God, and that by the strength of the Roman army on the land and the navy and the sea, Rome had brought peace to the world. This is what they claimed. This was their right for ruling. This was their right for conquering the world. This is their right to conquer and to harm Christians. They have this right because they brought peace to the world. And so when we see that this guy is able to take peace from the earth, it shows that the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, is a farce. Rome cannot bring lasting peace to the world. That peace only lasts as long as there is no insurrection or rebellion. It's Christ alone who can bring peace to the earth, not Rome. Now, when I say that the white horseman represents initial conquest and the red horseman represents the more escalated stage of violence that follows, this is something that can be viewed in just about any invasion in history, which is why the Sills ultimately have to do with all the woes and troubles of history leading up to the second coming of Christ. Now, I put this on the screen, and I'm not making a point against the United States or against Iraq or anything like that. What I just want to show you is if you look at the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, what does it say the total number of deaths are? 353. That's like the White Horseman. That's the initial invasion, which is never the greatest pocket of violence. Look at the insurrections that followed later and what the freedom fighters have done. The following year, 745 people died. 702 people died in combat. After that, 750. And so you will always find it's like this. A white horseman goes out to conquer, and then a red horseman follows, and he is much more bloody and much more violent than the initial invasion. This is just the character of war. This is the character of conflict throughout our history as people. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not hurt the oil in the." The rider on the black horse poses more interpretive difficulties than the other horsemen. There are a couple of lines in here that are hard to interpret, but we'll just take it as it comes. First of all, he's black. Black signifies the sorrow and mourning caused by the famine and suffering that follow war. So you don't want to look at the black horseman and see him as famine that happened because it didn't rain. No, this represents the famine that inevitably comes to serious war. You have conquest, and then you have insurrection and rebellions, and then inevitably you have famine. Look at Syria in the last few years. The famine situations there are serious. People not getting enough food, enough water, enough medicine. That's what the black horseman refers to. He refers to the famine that will inevitably follow on the heels of bloody conflict. Remember, these things are in this order for a reason. They cause each other. This is repeated in 6:12, where black as sackcloth refers to the Jewish garment for mourning. So we don't need to look to capitalism to provide the definition of the meaning black. We look elsewhere in Jewish culture, and we look elsewhere in the book of Revelation. Black already has meaning. It's a color that represents mourning. Now, the symbolism should not be taken literally. Wheat and barley are measured by volume, not by weight. Now, some folks have criticized the book of Revelation and said that it is illogical at this point. And the reason they say that is because when you went to the market to buy wheat or barley, the two things that are being targeted in this plague, it was not weighed out. It was measured out by volume. A measuring cup or a measuring bowl or whatever. It was measured by volume, not by weight. And so people look at this text and they say, if this black horseman represents a famine of wheat or a famine of barley, why is he holding weighing scales? You don't weigh wheat and barley when you go to the market. You measure it by volume, not by weight. And so they go, this is a part where the writer just made a mistake. And I think that that is a very silly objection. One of the reasons it's so silly is because, as we've seen, the book of Revelation is filled with allusions to Old Testament imagery. And scales and weights were oftentimes a metaphor for judgment in the Old Testament. Think of when Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is taken to him and the writing appears on the wall. It says that you've been weighed in the balances and have been found lacking. So weights and weighing scales are a very prominent metaphor in Scripture for judgment, and so it should not surprise us that it shows up here. And while it was standard for wheat and barley to be measured by volume and not by weight, we do have some historical evidence of times of severe famine where it was in fact weighed. It was not measured by volume. We don't know how common that was in a famine, but it certainly existed. And so this could be referring to that. Either way, this does not represent a mistake of the biblical writer. There are a number of ways to explain this. There are a number of ways that this could make sense. A day's wage for a quart of wheat and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wage. A day's wage, or a denarius, for a quart of wheat meant a worker's entire earnings would be spent up on necessary food, with nothing left over for other needs. The prices quoted here reflect an 800% inflation in the normal cost of wheat and about a 530% increase in the normal cost of barley. In other words, this is a very bad famine. A quart of wheat was enough food for one person for a day, and 3 quarts of barley were barely enough for a small family. Now, there were very few small families in the ancient world, except among the wealthy. The wealthy oftentimes had small families. But if you're a normal person and you've got 5 or 6 kids, a day's wage cannot provide a day's food. You just don't have enough to feed your family. And so this is this very painful famine. War has taken its conquest. The white horse has taken its toll, and then the violence that comes later with the red horsemen is very disruptive. And now you have a horrible famine with the black horsemen. It says, the voice from the throne says, do not hurt the oil and the wine. Now this is the line of this prophecy that has proved so challenging to so many people. And so I want to give you some different options that have been proposed for this so that you can kind of see how people have taken this. Now, some think it's a social complaint. It's not a judgment. It's just a social complaint about the way things are under the Roman Empire. The poor are left with nothing, while the rich have as much oil and wine as they need. This position is very problematic, as Osborne points out, because this is a judgment that one of the living beings around God's throne has summoned this judgment. He's caused it, and so this judgment, on some level, is something God is permitting, something God is allowing to happen. As Osborne says, This view hardly fits the context, especially with the command not to harm coming from the throne itself. Why would God decree that the rich flourish and the poor alone suffer? That would not be the type of judgment found in this book. When we get to chapter 18, we'll see that one of Revelation's complaints is that the rich are taking advantage of the poor. So why would a judgment come from God himself where he's just going to attack the poor and not the rich? I mean, that just doesn't make sense, and Osborne is right. You wouldn't find something like that in the book of Revelation or in the Bible at all, I think. The second position, and I think that this is probably the right one, and it could work out a couple different ways, but this is probably right. God limits the famine to just one season of the year, the wheat and barley season, and will not affect the other seasons. So wheat and barley are harvested in the spring and the early summer, and uh, grapes and olive oil are harvested in the fall. And so this is to show God's mercy, that this is a limited plague, that the famine will last for the first part of the year, but by the last part of the year, the famine will be finished. That's one possibility. Now, since the horsemen have to do with armies, because it was armies that rode on horseback, since it has to deal with war, I think more likely this depicts God restraining the ruthlessness of war. Invading soldiers destroy only this year's crop. So if an invading army came through, if they wanted to hurt you real bad, they would burn down the standing barley and they would burn down the standing grain. And that would lead to severe famine, which is a very bad thing. But it would only last for a year. Next year, you will have additional barley and additional wheat. However, if an army was being ruthless, if they had lost all their humanity and they really wanted to hurt you, then they would destroy the vineyards that produce the wine, and they would destroy the olive trees that produce the olives, because it takes years for your vineyard. If you plant a vineyard, you're not going to get any wine out of it for about 3 years, and it takes more years than that to get a good, strong vineyard going. Now, olive trees, you're not going to get any oil out of an olive tree for about 17 years. So if they come and destroy the wheat and the barley, they have hurt you really bad for 1 year. But if they come and they destroy the vintage, and they come and they destroy the olive trees, they have hurt you for years to come. And so I think that's what this is. God is permitting these horrible conflicts, but he also intervenes to restrain the terribleness of war. Wheat and barley, that's this year's famine. But the vintage and the olive trees, that would be several years of famine. And so God is restraining that. And this is kind of the character of plagues in the book of Revelation in general. When they begin, God does not just give a full frontal assault. We'll see many places that he's trying to get people to repent, that he is holding back his wrath, he is holding back his justice, so that people will have a chance to accept the Lamb and to repent and to come into covenant relationship. As we get to the trumpets, the plagues will be a little bit more extreme. And as you go through the book, a little bit more extreme until you get to the bowls of wrath. When people just simply refuse to repent, he finally unleashes his wrath in full. So we're at the very beginning of this process, and so we see that God is still holding back wrath to a large degree. And I think that's all this is trying to say, and this is most likely the right view. Now, this view, I think, is awful, and but I just want to give it to you real quick. A lot of folks think that the book of Revelation was written not at the end of the first century. I said a lot of folks, actually a minority of people think that this wasn't written at the end of the first century about how the second coming of Christ will happen one day. A lot of folks think this book is written about to predict the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So when Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, they say that's the Battle of Armageddon in chapter 16. The Battle of Armageddon is not the conclusion of history. They say it's just the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now, there is so much wrong with that perspective, and this perspective, I think, is so bad that I almost didn't even put it in here. But very quickly, some view this as describing the terrible conditions at the siege of Jerusalem when starvation prevailed, but a group of rebels led by John Gishala stole the sacred oil and wine used for offerings from the dinner temple, and had a drinking party. Again, there's just so little evidence that the book should be read this way. And the Christians reading this book are in Asia Minor. They're nowhere near Jerusalem. So that they would be able to read Revelation and interpret it this way and know all these details about somebody stealing wine and olive oil over in Jerusalem and having a party with it, it's very unlikely that they would even know that they would even be able to read this and make this connection. So I don't take this view very seriously at all. Now this view, this is the last one we'll consider, shows up in lots of the scholarly literature, and I think it could be right. It would supplement the second view, the one I liked. It's not either or, but this could possibly be one aspect of this prophecy. Around AD 92, so that's just a few years before Revelation is written. Around AD 92, Emperor Domitian ordered half of the vineyards in the province of Asia Minor be uprooted to make room to grow more grain for his armies. Eventually, wise advisors persuaded Domitian otherwise. Now, this audience would understand that it is God who kept the famine from getting worse by his sovereign decree, not Domitian. So, Domitian is like, I don't have enough food for my army. I don't have enough wheat and grain. And he says, so let's go ahead and destroy the vintage in Asia Minor. And again, vineyards, like I said, take years before they can grow and become very productive. He says, let's uproot those and plant wheat and barley so that we have more food. Less wine, but more food. And what everybody but Domitian knew that this was bad because the soil in Asia Minor was not very good at growing wheat and barley, but it was very good at growing olive trees, or excuse me, growing vineyards, growing grapes. And so people said, you're going to destroy that province's economy, and you're ultimately going to affect the whole empire if you do this. And so the whole world breathed a sigh of relief when they talked him out of this. And so a lot of folks have looked at this and they've said, well, that's what this is referring to. The people in Asia Minor would have been very worried that Domitian was going to destroy the vineyards. Eventually he didn't. And so this little part of Revelation is reminding us that it was God who ultimately has the say-so in whether or not the vineyards are destroyed or not. Ultimately, Domitian is not in control. Domitian is not sovereign. I don't know if this is really one of the things that Revelation is referring to. It could be supplemental, but I think ultimately, like I said, do not hurt the oil and the wine. Is God restraining the ruthlessness of war? If it's him restraining Domitian as well, that's okay. I mean, that could definitely be one of the explanations. Pale green horse. The name of the one who rode it was Death, and Hades followed right behind. They were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill its population with sword, famine, and death. That's what it says in the Greek, death, but it can also be translated disease. We'll talk about that in a moment. And by the wild animals of the earth. So there are some translation issues here to deal with. Some Bibles will say that he rode on a pale horse. Some Bibles will say that he rode a pale green horse. And you will find folks who say it's just a green horse. So how come people translate it differently? Well, the Greek word is chloros, which is the word from which we get our word chlorophyll, which is what makes the plants green. And there are other places in the Gospels where this word is used. For example, Jesus has the people sit down on the green grass in the Gospels. So this is definitely a word that means green, no doubt about it. So why do people translate it as pale? Well, it's oftentimes translated as pale because of ancient parlance about people getting sick or people dying. When somebody died and the body turned pale, people would refer to it as green. I mean, maybe they looked at a pale body and thought it had a shade of green. And so green became a way of talking about dead, pale bodies. And also when people got sick, or we have ancient poetry where people, a guy's in love with a woman and he says he's lovesick, he's turned green. And this language, this parlance, has survived into the modern age. Whenever you see, in cartoons or in TV shows, someone who's, a zombie or the undead, they're oftentimes depicted as green. Same thing, you watch in a cartoon, someone's about to throw up, they turn green. Someone's sick, it's like the face at the top right, they turn green. And so this phenomenon continues into the modern age. And so when a lot of translators get here, they know the word means green, but they translate it as pale because they know it's a reference to a corpse. Right? So the word does literally mean green. It's just a question of what does green mean within the parlance of the ancient people when they talk about dead bodies and when they talk about illness. The word oftentimes shows up in that context, as it does for us sometimes in our modern context. Another translation issue is it says he's going to kill them with the sword, with famine, and with death. The word death is oftentimes the Greek word used that means pestilence or illness. So if God is going to kill someone with death, it means he's going to kill them with pestilence or illness. And so that's what we see here. The sword, famine, and then he'll kill them with death, that is with sickness or illness, which is a result of the bloodshed and the famine of the first three horsemen. Now this fourth horseman adds the inevitable to this, pestilence and illness and disease, and this, of course, leads to death in general. Death in general, and pestilence in particular. Now, the green horseman summarizes all the horsemen. The sword represents the violence of the first two horsemen. Famine represents the third horseman. And pestilence is the fourth horseman's addition, as well as killing with the wild animals of the earth. Oftentimes, captured opponents were given to the lions or to the beasts or to the wolves. If you were a slave who had killed your master, one of the punishments is they would tie you up in a bag and they would put a snake and a scorpion and a mouse in the bag with you. And they would throw you into the ocean in the bag with those three creatures, and that would be your way to die. And so death by illness and wild animals, all these things are the ultimate aftermath of conquest. Conquest leads to more bloodshed. Bloodshed leads to famine, and eventually this is going to lead to pestilence and to people being killed with wild animals. And so all these horsemen are connected, and one causes the next one. And this is the pattern that prevails in human history. Very unfortunate, but this is the pattern that will prevail in human history and that will characterize human conflict all the way up until the second coming of Christ. A final note, Hades is seen as following behind on foot, grimly gathering up the souls of those who died from these plagues. So this is what Osborne says. So death is on a horse, but it says Hades is following him. So death goes on a horse and he kills people, and then Hades is coming along behind him, taking the souls down to the underworld. And the structure of the book of Revelation is very meticulous, and so it is here. We will find that God's enemies are introduced in this book in the reverse order that they are destroyed. First, death and Hades are analyzed, then the dragon is analyzed, then the beast and the false prophet is analyzed in chapter 13, then Babylon is analyzed in chapter 17. Well, now they're going to be destroyed in reverse order. First Babylon, then the beast and the false prophet, then the dragon, and then finally death and Hades is destroyed last. And that should remind you of 1 Corinthians 15, because Paul says that Jesus is at the right hand of the Father, and he must continue to reign until he has placed all his enemies under his feet, and the last enemy to be destroyed is death. And so we see that Revelation corroborates the Apostle Paul in depicting God's enemies being defeated, but the last one to be defeated is death.